"Good heavens," said the Duke of Haldgrove, not troubling to lower his voice, "someone has brought a plow horse to a hunt." The laughter went round the assembled riders like a ripple, bright and cruel in the cold October morning, and every polished head turned to look at the girl on the shaggy, thick-legged bay at the edge of the field. Denholm, Duke of Haldgrove, master of the finest stable in the north, and a man who prided himself on never being wrong about a horse or a rider, looked longest of all, and was quite certain he had never seen anything so absurd in his life. The beast was enormous and plain, a farm animal to its bones, with feathered fetlocks and a coat like a doormat and a head that would not have looked out of place between the shafts of a dray. The girl who sat it was no better dressed than her mount, a habit gone rusty at the seams, a hat that had seen several winters, boots mended at the toe. She had come, he was told, with the Pettigrews, poor cousins of theirs, a Miss Odette Lark, who kept house for an uncle and had been brought along to make up the numbers and had somehow been permitted to ride. She heard the laughter. Of course she heard it. The Duke watched her hear it, watched the color come up in her face, and waited for the tears or the flustered retreat or whatever it was that girls did when the whole glittering county laughed at them. She did none of it. She lifted her chin, settled her plain hat, gathered her reins in hands that were, he noticed despite himself, very quiet, very sure, and said to no one and to everyone, "He is a better horse than he looks, your grace. Most good things are." "Are they indeed?" said the Duke, amused. "We shall see. The country here is not kind to plow horses. There are walls." "He knows about walls," said Miss Lark. The Duke smiled, the cool smile that had unmade a great many people, and turned his own hunter a blood bay worth more than the Lark girl would see in her life toward the covert, and thought no more about her. There were 40 riders out, all of them mounted on the best that money and breeding could buy, young bucks on hot-blooded thoroughbreds, the county's finest horsewomen on their elegant park hacks, his own friends on animals he had sold them himself at prices that made him laugh. A shaggy bay farm horse and a poor relation in a rusty habit were a morning's amusement, no more. The hounds found, the field went away. And the country, as the Duke had promised, was not kind. It began well enough over the easy pasture, where speed told and the thoroughbreds drew ahead and the plow horse fell back, laboring so that the laughter drifted again down the field. But then the line turned north, into the high broken country the Duke knew and loved and had chosen precisely, because it sorted the riders from the passengers' country of blind ditches and boggy takeoffs, of stone walls slick with moss and hidden drops beyond, of plunging beck crossings where the footing gave way and only a horse that thought could keep its feet, country that did not care in the least how much an animal had cost. The elegant hacks began to refuse. The hot thoroughbreds, brave over a clean fence, lost their heads at the blind ditches and ran out, or stopped, or leapt too big and came down floundering. A young man on a 500 guinea gray put the animal into a boggy beck and had to be hauled out by a groom, both of them black to the waist. One of the county's celebrated horsewomen, superb in the park, turned her mare aside from a mossed wall with a drop behind and would not be persuaded to face it. Rider after rider fell away unhurt, mostly, but stopped, defeated by ground that asked more than money could answer. The Duke, well mounted and superbly skilled, pressed on near the front and did not at first notice that behind him the field had thinned to almost nothing. It was at the third beck, the bad one, where the bank had been cut away by the autumn spate and the takeoff was a foot of black sucking mud, that his own blood bay hunter, brave, brilliant, worth a fortune, planted its feet and would not go. The Duke sat it 3 times at the crossing. 3 times the horse ran back, snorting, eyes rolling at the treacherous ground. He was a fine enough rider to know it was not cowardice. The animal simply did not trust its feet in that mud, and a horse that did not trust its feet could not be made to trust them by any whip in England. He wheeled aside, breathing hard, and looked back over the country he had crossed, and saw that of 40 riders who had gone away from the covert, there was, behind him, exactly one still coming. The shaggy bay plow horse. It came down the long slope at an unhurried, rolling, tireless gallop, ears pricked, taking the broken ground as though it had been bred for nothing else, which the Duke understood in a rush of pure astonishment it very nearly had. And on its back, easy as breathing, sat Miss Odette Lark. She did not gallop past him. She drew up beside the bad beck, and she did not send the big horse at it in a rush. She let it walk to the very edge, let it drop its head and look at the black mud, let it think, and the Duke, who had spent 30 years learning horses, watched a master class and knew it for one. She was not making the horse jump. She was letting the horse decide it could. She sat still and light, and asked with her hands so quietly he could barely see the aid, and the great shaggy beast gathered its haunches under it, picked its takeoff a yard to the left where the bank was firmer. It chose. The animal chose, because she had taught it that its judgment would be trusted, and heaved itself across the beck with a lumbering, certain power that no thoroughbred in the county could have matched, and landed sure-footed and rolling on the far bank as though it had done it 1,000 times. Which the Duke thought it very probably had, in the plowlands, over the drains, in weather that would keep every hunter in his stable in its box. She reined in on the far side and looked back at him across the beck, and there was no triumph in her face, only a kind of quiet inquiry, and she said, "He knows about walls, your grace, and becks. He has crossed worse ground than this in the dark, carrying the harrow, when I was a girl and my father was ill and the fields had to be worked whoever worked them." She patted the shaggy neck. "You cannot buy a horse that thinks. You can only give it reason to." The Duke of Haldgrove sat his brilliant, useless, 500-guinea hunter on the wrong side of the beck, and did not know when he had last been so thoroughly and so justly humbled. "How did you get him across the first pasture," he said, "if he is so slow on the flat?" "I didn't hurry him," she said. "I knew the flat would sort out the ones who only had speed. I saved him for the ground that would ask a question. A wise horse and a patient rider will always be behind at the gate and in front at the finish if the country is honest." She almost smiled. "You made the country honest, your grace. I thank you for it. It is the first hunt I have ever ridden where the plow horse had the advantage." The hounds had checked somewhere ahead. There was no one else in sight. The whole glittering field was scattered across the fells behind them, walking their beaten horses home. It was only the two of them in the cold, bright morning on either side of a black beck, the Duke on the best horse money could buy, and the poor relation on the plow horse he had laughed at, and it was perfectly, unarguably clear which of them the country had chosen. "Show me," he said, "how you got him to pick his own takeoff." And she did. She walked the big horse back, and when the Duke had found a firmer crossing lower down and brought his hunter over at last, she showed him patiently, without condescension, as one horseman to another, how she had spent years teaching the animal to be trusted, how she asked and then permitted, how a horse that had been allowed to think would carry a rider over ground that broke the hearts of finer beasts ridden by finer hands. The Duke of Haldgrove, who had never in his life been taught anything about horses by anyone, listened to a girl in a rusty habit for the better part of an hour, and felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel, which was that he was in the presence of someone who knew more than he did about the thing he loved best. He rode home beside her. It caused a sensation. The glittering field, straggling back on their beaten expensive horses, watched the Duke of Haldgrove escort the poor relation on the plow horse through his own park gates with an expression of grave and public attention, and the ripple that went round now was of a different kind entirely. He called at the Pettigrews the next day, which astonished the Pettigrews. He asked Miss Lark to look over his stable, which astonished his grooms. She went through it stall by stall, and she was courteous and honest and quite unimpressed by the prices, and she told him of his favorite hunter. "He is a beautiful horse, and he will never be a great one, because he has been ridden by people who never let him decide anything, and a horse that is never allowed to think forgets how." The Duke, who had ridden the horse himself for 3 seasons, took the criticism standing, and knew it was fair. "I have a great many horses," he said, "and it appears I do not deserve most of them. I have need of someone who does. Someone who could teach my stable and my grooms," and he paused, "and their master to let a horse think." "You are offering me a position, your grace." "I am considering," said the Duke, "offering you rather more than that, but I have known you 2 days, and I have learned this week the value of not rushing my fences. So I will begin with the position, and I will ask if you will permit me to call on you a great deal while you fill it." Odette Lark looked at him a long moment, the way she looked at a piece of broken country, weighing what it truly asked. "You laughed at my horse," she said. "I did. In front of the whole county." "I did," he said. "And the whole county watched that same horse leave every animal in my stable standing on the wrong side of a beck. I have been made to eat my words in public before a larger audience than any man deserves, Miss Lark, and I find I am not sorry, because it has introduced me to the finest horsewoman in the North, and shown me exactly how great a fool I am, and a man who knows himself a fool has a chance of improving. Marry me eventually, and you may laugh at my horses every day for the rest of my life. I shall probably deserve it." She did laugh then, not the county's cruel ripple, but a real, warm, surprised laugh. The laugh of a woman who has been made small a great many times and finds, unexpectedly, that she has been seen instead. He courted her over the winter the way she had taught him to take the beck, slowly, letting her pick her own ground, asking quietly and then permitting, never once rushing his fences. By spring she trusted him. By summer she loved him. And when at last she consented, she did it on horseback, on the big shaggy bay, on the far bank of the very beck where she had first left him standing, and he had to find the firm crossing and come over to her, which he understood was entirely the point. They were married from Haldgrove. She brought exactly one thing of her own to the great house: the Plow horse, who lived out his long days in the best loose box in the North, fat and honored, and who was ridden, when he was ridden at all, only by the Duchess, and only over the honest broken country that had made her, on the mornings when she wished to remember how far a plain thing could go if someone only gave it reason to think. "You cannot buy a horse that thinks," the Duke of Haldgrove would say to his sons in the years that came, standing at the paddock rail beside their mother. "You can only give it reason to. Your mother taught me that, on a Plow horse, the day she made a fool of every fine rider in the county, myself first among them, it was the best day's hunting of my life." And the Duchess, who had been laughed at once by all the North and was now its most respected horsewoman, would rest her hand on his arm and say nothing, because some things a plain thing need not say aloud, when it has been so thoroughly, so lastingly seen.